Okay, let's begin, eh? So our next, we'll introduce our guest speaker. Our next session, panel session, will be at just after 2:20, Destination 2030, our past to a better future. And then our final session, Voices from Across the Oceans, with the representatives of some of the High Commissions who are here with us this afternoon. And as I said, we will look to conclude just before 4 o'clock this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, it is really a privilege to introduce our keynote speaker for this conference today. I think the best way to introduce our next speaker is to say the things that he hasn't done rather than the things that he has done. He is an amazing New Zealander, foremost technology innovator in Aotearoa, New Zealand, brought up in the small East Coast village on the North Island of New Zealand. He was 7 when electricity arrived at home. That was in 1957. And that's when New Zealand got its first computer. He founded Animation Research Limited in 1990 on nothing more than a handshake, and today is working still at the base in Dunedin. It covers sports events all over the world, and they have a joint venture with Airways New Zealand who market the air traffic control simulator they built for them. Ladies and gentlemen, my daughter, who's at St. Joseph's Māori Girls College, not far from where he was brought up, said to me, "Dad, do you know Sir Ian Taylor?" I said, "I know of him, yes." She said, "Yeah, he's the man." I said, "Is he? What does he do?" She goes, "Oh, he does heaps of stuff and he's mean." So ladies and gentlemen, would you please make welcome your keynote speaker for this conference. He does heaps of stuff and he's mean, Sir Ian Taylor.
Taki te mu te waka, ko mohaka te awa, ko haururu te maunga, ko ngati pāhauere te hapu, ko ngati kahangunu te iwi, ko tamatea pōkai whenua te tangata. When I was growing up here in Rauponga back in the 1950s, I could never have imagined that one day I'd use a thing called the internet to bring you back to my very first school. Now both my parents taught here. My mother, Mangu Rose Kaimoana, Pahuera Ngati Kahungunu, and my father, Bernard John Taylor, whose great-grandparents had come here from Scotland.
At least that's the way it was when the reenactment of Captain Cook's landing at Whanaungatanga Bay on Saturday, October...
It was here that I first learned of the footsteps laid down by my ancestors, my Pākehā ancestors, the Vikings, the Scots, and Captain Cook, the great English navigator who, I was told, sailed all the way from England to discover New Zealand. But what I was never taught was the amazing story of the footsteps laid down by my other tupuna, my Polynesian ancestors who sailed to this land 500 years before Captain Cook. As a boy, I never realised that even before the Vikings had launched their ships across the seas to Britannia, the Polynesians had already launched their waka haurua across the massive Pacific Ocean, destined ultimately for Aotearoa. They crossed a third of the planet in state-of-the-art sailing craft, guided by the stars and the ocean currents. To make it to these shores across Te Moana Nui a Kiwa, the tupuna on my mother's side had to be more than just sailors. They had to be astronomers, astrologers, scientists, engineers, mathematicians. They had to be innovators. And the voyage they made, as we are only just beginning to discover, is arguably the greatest story of human migration in the history of mankind. So, I was 72 on Friday, and I never heard that story until about 6 or 7 years ago. We navigated those stormy waters. Our ancestors navigated those stormy waters. There is a Māori whakatauki, ko ngā tahua o tapawai e nanahi, hei to ira ora mō apopo. That is, the footsteps we lay down in our past create the paving stones of where we stand today. And in our Māori worldview, te ao Māori, those footsteps are always in front of us. They are always out there to see. We stand with our back to the future. I can still see the shirt I was wearing as a 7-year-old when the man from the Hawke's Bay Electric Power Board turned up and linked our house to electricity for the first time, and with the flick of the switch lit up the house like daylight. And the value of seeing those footsteps that lead me to standing here in front of you today is that I am absolutely certain that as a 7-year-old I saw that and thought, man, you can do that, you can do anything. Mean. So it's really interesting. Let's take a look at some of those footsteps, because the greatest story of human migration across the largest expanse of open water on the planet, an ocean of water that could hold every landmass on the planet, and this is how we depicted the arrival. This Goldie painting sat in the Auckland Art Gallery for decades. It's called The Arrival of Māori in New Zealand. Well, let me share with you the footsteps that our ancestors actually laid down. 3,500 years ago, our Polynesian ancestors set out across the mighty Pacific Ocean, the largest expanse of open water on the planet, on what was to become one of the greatest voyages of discovery in human history. As they journeyed out from Southeast Asia across the Pacific, they became master navigators, guided by their knowledge of the stars. Look at the years that are up there. Following the pathways of the birds and sea creatures around them, they spent thousands of years exploring Te Moana Nui a Kiwa. They discovered islands like Samoa, Tonga, Fiji, Rarotonga, Tahiti, Hawaii, and Rapa Nui Easter Island. They even made it as far as South America. 1,000 years ago, our great voyager Kupe set sail from Hawaiiki in a state-of-the-art double-hulled waka, a waka haurua, on a voyage of discovery that would take him across thousands of kilometres of the Pacific Ocean. Guided only by the stars, the sun, and the ocean currents, this was no accidental voyage. He had set out for a land he knew was there, the land of the long white cloud, Aotearoa. When Kupe returned with directions, a new wave of migration began across the Pacific Ocean. So as you think about the future, looking at those footsteps that our ancestors laid down in the past, take heed of that. That is something to be incredibly proud of. That is the untold story. That is Mātauranga. Now it's really interesting, the whole concept of Mātauranga. We're trying to bring that into schools. We're trying to bring that discussion. Mātauranga is a bigger version of the universe, a view, Māori word, or Indigenous people's view of the universe and their place in it. But here's what we get from politicians. Mātauranga Māori shouldn't be taught at the expense of science. University academics claim Mātauranga is not science. Well, actually, they're right. It isn't science. Science is part of Mātauranga. And if you want to see science, stick this up there, bickies.
The star compass, it's been with us since our ancestors started navigating. It's a tool that we're able to use and then later memorise so that we can understand where the rising and setting points of the sun, the moon and the stars all are. We have our 4 main points of north, south, east and west. In between them we have 7 different whare. Stars, they live in a whare, they live in a house, they stay in that whare, they rise in that whare, they'll set in a whare over the other side of the compass, but it's still got the same name of the whare. On a waka, you don't have any landmarks to be able to understand which direction you're going in. All you've got is whole 360 degrees of ocean. And so you need to somehow be able to break that horizon up so that you can understand which direction you go in. When you see that sun rising, when you're on the waka, then whichever way your waka is facing, that's where you're calibrating your hand, you're working out how many houses, how many whare you are away from your particular mark that you've got on the horizon, whether it's stars, the sun or the moon. What you're really doing is you're stepping off the star compass and you're putting everything into your memory, into your hinengaro, so you can go anywhere after you've got all that memorised and understand in which direction you're going at any time of the day or night.
And yet, as we came to commemorate the arrival of Captain Cook here in New Zealand 250 years ago, there were people who said Māori have to get used to the idea that Captain Cook brought great benefit to this Stone Age people. I mean, look at that. It's incredible. And just to put it in context, so this is the Waka Haurua. So in that year that we commemorated Captain Cook arriving, this Waka Haurua, the Whawhaiti, sailed from Tahiti to New Zealand, skippered by a 23-year-old wahine toa. We put some gear on this thing. This is 4,000 kilometres. This is Kupe's voyage. We put some gear on just to figure out how she did, because she did it with Celestial Navigator on board, using nothing but the stars, sun, and ocean currents. She did this in 2019. The zigzag there is they had to slow down to wait for the Endeavour to arrive, and it was only coming from Sydney. So what I really love about that story, though, is this is the think tank on the back of the Waka Haurua. That's India in the middle, and over there is, I've just skipped my name out, but she is the celestial navigator who used the stars, sun, and ocean currents to bring that Waka 4,000 kilometres from Tahiti to Tauranga. How many people knew that story, had heard about it? Look at this. I mean, it's not a lot, is it? That was the story of our beginning, and yet in 250, it was ignored. It was the beginning of our story. And the other thing is, it's a reminder as we talk about te ao Māori. Māori never arrived in New Zealand. That famous painting, The Arrival of Māori in New Zealand, the people who arrived were from the Pacific. They arrived from Samoa, Tonga, Tahiti, Rarotonga. There was no arrival of Māori in New Zealand. So let's keep that in context as well and start to tell the story. The latest New Zealand history curriculum, Chapter 1, is called The Arrival of Māori in New Zealand. How do we get this? So we start to fix that, and we'll show you how we're fixing it. Now, there is a concept in Pacifica, which is talanoa. Talanoa is where whenever you gather and you speak and listen with respect. Really interesting, isn't it? So far, there's been two wahine. A wahine, the Star Celestial Navigator, a 23-year-old wahine skippering the Whawhaiti, and then there's these two young Pacifica girls who said this about Mātauranga Māori in science. Students reply, this is what they said: it's time to rethink their perspectives that Indigenous knowledge is not science. Both Western science and Indigenous science are needed to help solve world problems such as climate change. That comes from two young wahine who are still at school. And we have to listen to the rubbish that we hear from politicians about climate change and sustainability that just goes, oh, sorry, there might be some here. But anyway, just to reinforce that, take a look. So the two wahine you hear from this, English is their second language. They were educated in kura kaupapa until they were 11. Listen to the wisdom.
We are all responsible for what we have, the entire world, and to keep on going on for the next generation. It's not like just a Māori or Pacific responsibility to protect, but it's whoever lives in it. And it's for all the other oceans, that we're all connected. It's just, where is that connection? And I think that's what Tuia has done for us, is started the conversations in terms of where we can find those connections and how we can build on those connections. This is where it is. At a new beginning, Mahia, the very first place to see the light of day, and now in partnership with Pākehā, a place where today's state-of-the-art waka will be sent back.
very stars that brought us here. Isn't it amazing how far we've come and how far we can still go?
A bit of license there, giving Ma here the first one. It's pretty close, but it fitted the story really well. So now we ask ourselves, why is it that our Pacifica and Māori students suffer or fail to perform in this thing called STEM? Science, technology, engineering and math. It is mātauranga. It is there. It is in their DNA. So we have launched a website, and I'm going to go move quickly through it. So this has been gifted to every school anywhere in the world, but it's devoted to teach all of our kids that innovation is in their DNA, and that story begins with the incredible story of navigating stormy seas, looking at the past to figure out our future. There are 3 chapters in it: Land of Voyages, Papatūānuku Breeze, I'll get to that shortly, and Kiwi Can Fly. So this isn't a story that is history. This is the story that we launched with Team New Zealand at the America's Cup. Why? Because Pete and Blair embraced the concept that they sailed in the footsteps of Kupe and Maui, and Grant Dalton, bless his cotton socks, accepted the idea that the wonderful foiling machine called Te Rehutai had its footsteps leading all the way back to the state-of-the-art waka haurua that sailed on top of the water. So we go through, these are the sort of lessons they're going to go fast through this, but now schools are using it everywhere, and we have just been blown away by what is happening. I was in Christchurch this morning, where they are holding an esports game, esports based on mātauranga. So this is just this morning on my way up to here. So these are groups of kids from 6 to 10 using Minecraft, and take a look at who's doing it. You know, we talk about the gender, we talk about this, just step out of the way, they're coming. They're 7 and 8, and they are programming in Minecraft against a school of boys. Have a look down the road. The boys have all got their uniforms and ties on. It's great. But here they are. So just step aside. We keep talking about that gender inequality. They'll fix it. Just step aside and let them. There go the boys in their flash uniforms. Don't know who won. Anyway, so now I'm going to jump on. Papatūānuku Breeze. This is another part of this platform that we've put in there, and it's the kind of things we should be talking about. The narrator here is a 9-year-old Māori girl. English is her second language, and listen to her.
At 11:59 p.m. on Wednesday the 25th of March 2020, Aotearoa stopped. A nation was still. But if you listened, you could hear Papatūānuku, the Earth Mother, breathing. The wind over our Maunga, our mountains. The waves on our moana, our oceans. And the songs of the children of Tāne. Our lives, normally so loud and busy, became soft and distant. We learned what was truly important. Our whānau, our friends. And Papatūānuku spoke to us. Look what happens when you take cars off the road. Look what happens when you close factories producing pointless plastic. Papatūānuku will clean the air. Papatūānuku will clean the water. Papatūānuku's message is simple. We are all connected, the people, the plants, the animals. Aotearoa is our waka, and we need to find ways to look after it. He waka eke noa. Papa Tūānuku is guiding us. Are we ready to listen?
So that's a question you can take home with you. Are you ready to listen? And here is what you could be listening to.
Bioforestry is part of a whole development of making a bioeconomy which is totally circular, renewable, sustainable programming, where we take the trees or forest and we convert it into wood products, high value manufactured wood and biochemistry, provide an alternative to petroleum. Well, we're the Indigenous people of New Zealand, and we have a lot of knowledge and systems and historical connections to the land and to the people. And so we centre everything on what we do on three core concepts. One is tikanga, one is kotahitanga, and one is mauri. Tikanga is a Māori concept around what is right, what is culture, what is correct. And so for us, tikanga is balancing planet and people. And the principles around that are fundamental because people and the planet cannot be separated in our minds. Kotahitanga is the concept of unity and working in unison. And what we want to do is work in unison with the forestry industry, the governments, the major international companies that are made a pledge to remove themselves from petroleum-based packaging, and also lifting up the opportunities for Māoridom across our asset base in forestry land. It's understanding the link between Papa Tuanuku, Earth Mother, Ranginui, Sky Father, and everything in between. It's about the unity and working in unison with nature. Nature is the solution to climate change. Nature is the solution to the opportunities for New Zealand.
So, that's, I think, what we have been talking about. That's what this conference, it isn't new. It is happening. And we have, yes, I think I can talk about it coming from a technology industry, but we talk on the multi-billion-dollar area of gaming. But actually, when you look at what challenge and the challenge that faces us, we need to be looking past those sorts of things. What does that do to Papa Tūānuku? We need to be looking at technologies that make a difference to climate change, sustainability, and create high-value jobs in those sections. We have the opportunity to create our own multi-billion-dollar new industry, which would see by 2035 no logs leaving New Zealand. And that's another conference. You always have to have your why. My why is my 2-year-old moko, who I videoed this when he was 2. What's that?
A pookie go in the water. A pookie go in the water. A pookie go in the water.
Look at him.
Mommy.
What's Papa Tūānuku's message? We are all, the plants, the animals, the people. We are all one. That's what Jackson enveloped there at 2 years old. How do we make sure they never lose it? Never lose it. How do we remind ourselves that? And I just one little thing. I know I'm running out of time. I'm sorry. Is it all right if I share something? Because I want to share this. COVID. So March the 13th, 2020. 2020 was going to be our best year ever. We had contracts all over the world, and on March the 13th, Black Friday, it all came to a grinding halt. Totally lost everything, all our contracts, all gone to zero. Just want to summarise again, this is a Māori, and I'm sure lots of businesses did this, but the first thing we did was guaranteed all of our staff that nobody would lose their jobs. This wasn't a business, it was whānau, it was family. So no one lost their jobs. We then sent them all home from day one. This is before lockdown, and we told them that we could pay them for the rest of the year if all they did was look after themselves and anyone in the house. That was it. And then I said, but now you've got a bit of spare time. Could you think about a couple of other things? And I want you to think about the opportunities of COVID. Never, ever put the word challenge with the word COVID. The only word that goes with COVID is opportunity. It is here. And I have a longer version of this, but the opportunity that came up to us was, it actually came from a challenge. The challenge was we travelled all over the world to every sport event that we did. Our carbon footprint was horrendous. The challenge was, what happens if sports start again and the borders are closed? We looked at it as an opportunity, and that opportunity said, simple, we'll just do it all from Dunedin. And on June the 6th, when the first sport event in the world happened again, this is how it was delivered.
Meanwhile, golf's PGA Tour officially kicked off this morning, watched closely by Dunedin's Animation Research, who for the first time produced the tour's graphics live from their office 12,000 kilometres away from the action. John McKenzie reports.
Back with a bang. The American PGA Tour teeing off in Texas this morning, 3 months after it was abandoned due to coronavirus.
Got a decent amount of help.
No fans though, but that wasn't the only difference when it came to the coverage.
Globally connected. Now try to follow this. Using facilities across the world to bring you coverage. In Orlando, at the Golf Channel headquarters, are Sir Nick, Ian, and Frank. Socially distant, I might add. And in Stamford, Connecticut, mobile production trucks are connected to our facilities here in Fort Worth. Across the country in Burbank, another production studio is remotely supplying scoring graphics, top tracer cameras, and other technology. Across the world, in New Zealand, our virtual eye crew is with us live, supplying all the augmented reality technology you're accustomed to seeing on CBS Golf. It's not quite 8 in the morning Sunday in New Zealand right now.
A long way south of Texas, holed up in a Dunedin workshop, the crew doing the graphics live, something Ian Taylor's team at Animation Research had to create themselves, with international travel not an option.
Having the talkback panel here makes us feel like we're on site, so it feels like we're actually just sitting another truck on the TV compound.
Everything about the setup has a Kiwi touch. From the workshop only being put together yesterday to cardboard cutouts showing the time difference.
It's only 4 or 5 weeks ago we thought, gee, what if we can't get there? And in that time this team has pulled this off.
First, the director calls for a graphic. Elliot here then clicks a few buttons. Next, it appears on screen for the golfing world to see. The first 2 days of coverage will be mostly sponsorship logos before CBS takes over the coverage where they'll introduce graphics like this.
He went after that one a little bit. You can see the ball speed up to 182. That's the fastest.
Just another way some Kiwi creativity flattened the curve in turbulent times.
So as we struggle with the concept of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and the power of technology, this is that example. We now do every golf tournament in the world from Dunedin. The British Open this next week will be done from Dunedin. We do 3,500 games of baseball remotely. I've never been to a game of baseball. We're doing NFL, we're doing COVID created this opportunity. It would never have happened without it. And that's how I think we have to look at what COVID has taught us as we think of Te Ao Māori and how we bring Te Ao Māori and that opportunity into our trade with the world. And just to acknowledge AWS, the platform we use from AWS to drive that entire operation has meant that where we used to have $200,000 to $250,000 worth of computers sitting at a venue, at every venue in the world, we now deliver it on an AWS platform that costs our clients less than $1 an hour. Ka pai. Sorry about that. Everyone knows I talk past my time limits.
No, we do. Hard to follow that act, just quietly. Please show your appreciation again, ladies and gentlemen, to Sir Ian Taylor. Thank you, Tā. Ngā mihi nui kia koe. Thank you so much for that presentation, and that's okay. We're still going to run to time with our duration on our next panels, ka pai? And I'll carve off time at the end to make sure we end at the right time before we have to conclude. So, e mihi atuana kia koe, Tā? Tēnā rawa atu koe. Ngā mihi nui kia tātou katoa. Okay, let's move now into our next session, and that was such a good segue into the next session. Destination 2030, our past to a better future. It's almost as if we scripted this, isn't it? our panel would consist of the incomparable, the Honourable Chris Finlayson, the inspirational Naisi Chen, and the indefatigable McGregor, and it will be chaired by Vanisa Dhiru. Born in Manawatu, she is an equality champion with a strong sense of social responsibility. She holds commissioner roles with the New Zealand National Commission of UNESCO and the Library and Information Advisory Commission, alongside other roles for NGOs and government departments. Based in Wellington, she has worked in a variety of advocacy roles throughout her career, and while serving the community in both paid and volunteer commitments, is a constant advocate for people from all walks of life. So can I introduce the chair for our next panel? Please put your hands together for Vanisa Dhiru.
He uri ahau no India. Ko Gujarat te rohe, ko Arawharia te iwi, ko Patel te hapu. E whānau mai aue I te taha o te awa o Manawatu, e raro I te maru o te maunga o Ruahine. Ko Vanisa Dhiru tōku ingoa. Ai nā mana ina reo ina rauranga tirama, tēnā koutou katoa. Vanisa Dhiru is my name, and I'd like to acknowledge mana whenua of the rohi, particularly Te Ateawa and Taranaki Whānui, and to Diplosphere for convening the kōrero today. My pleasure to be here on behalf of the New Zealand National Commission for UNESCO in my role as Commissioner for Communication and Information, and supporting Session 4, Destination 2030, our path to a better future, Whanaungatanga, our connectedness or shared sense of humanity, Whanaungatanga. I thought I'd firstly share very quickly with you in front of Mātua Martin. I am one of those in the room today at the beginning of my understanding of Mātauranga Māori. I say that proudly because it's up to some of us to just make sure that we know and say that out loud to others. This weekend, I've been with our Tamilian community at Te Arawa, supporting a slightly different kaupapa, but related, Sangnamam Te Wātaka. So I believe in both sets of reo, Te Wātaka in Te Reo Māori and Sananam in Tamil, mean the connection point between two deep oceans. That connection point being the kaupapa of that weekend to learn about each of the deep and historic cultures. Possibly one of the very few moments that I think that minority groups have connected at an introductionary level to each other, both in their reo, both about their tikanga, both from their historic cultural perspectives and their Indigenous ways from across the globe. Now, anyone in the audience that is familiar with Indian diaspora will realise from my reo tuariki that I shared that I'm not actually a Tamil, but a Gujarati. You'll know that because I mentioned I'm a Patel. My whānau from a very small village in the state of Gujarat. So yeah, I was just hanging around, basically listening in, but also sharing in some small way that I could the expressions to each party informally to help them share and understand the betterment of each other, what they could learn from each other's histories, from their stories, and understand and share whakaro and the alignment of tangata of each peoples for the vision of their tamariki, the next generation in Aotearoa, New Zealand. That brings me to this topic of this session. In some way, it's similar, not the same, but it looks to our past for a better of our future. The importance of intergenerational transmission of knowledge and the importance of this mahi at this time of manawatia a matariki. At this time, we are reflecting on the past before going into the future. There's a link between the discussions earlier today and the work of the New Zealand National Commission for UNESCO to grow the knowledge and capabilities to ensure a better future. Indigenous knowledge and practice that are thousands of years old have special relevance today in New Zealand and evaluates its place in a changed world where power is moving from the west to the east. In a world troubled by conflicts, climate change, pandemics and division, How can our values guide us to a better future? What role is there for Aotearoa New Zealand and for Māori perspectives? What will 2030 look like? I'd like to invite our panellists today. So we have the Honourable Chris Finlayson, QC, barrister, arbitrator, former Attorney General, former Minister for Treaty and Waitangi Negotiations, also a former neighbour of mine. Also on that panel, we've got Naisi Chen, a list MP based in Botany and is currently the second youngest member in Parliament. Naisi arrived from Aotearoa, New Zealand at the age of 5. Coming from Beijing, China, she's experienced the best of both worlds. A good friend of mine from the Asian diaspora. And Hone McGregor. Hone is a long-serving board member of a whānau business, Wakatu Incorporation, an indigenously owned company of land and sea, an experienced company director, chair, board member of several Māori land trusts, expertise in corporate management, governance, recruitment spanning public-private, NGO and volunteer sectors, lots of experience leading large and complex organisations. A long list of past roles, but however, today Hone is a member of the New Zealand Cabinet's Trade for All Advisory Board and currently on the Trade for All Ministerial Advisory Group. Current chair of our government's Our Land and Water National Science Challenge, chair of Volunteer Services Abroad Aotearoa, and chair of the Ministry of Primary Industries Fit for a Better World, Te Ao Māori Science Accelerator. Can I invite the panellists to come on stage? Kia ora Chris, kia ora Naisi, and kia ora Hone. Let's start with Chris.
Rangatira mā tēnei taku mihi atu ki a koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Can I acknowledge my former neighbour and tell her the best thing I ever did was get the hell out of Kate Shepherd Apartments after the Kaikoura earthquake, and I avoided all the trouble with those rapscallions down at Parliament earlier this year. So my advice to you is move to Kandala. There are 2 points I want to make this afternoon. Mrs. Thatcher once was asked when she intended to retire, and she said I could go on and on and on. And on this topic, I feel much the same. But Matty occupies an office just down the corridor from me, and I'm under very strict instructions to speak for 6 minutes, and thus, here it goes. There are 2 points I want to make this afternoon. And the first is that before we start going too far to exporting our views to the world, we need to get our own house in order. And based on 9 years of experience as Minister for Treaty of Waitangi negotiations, I have to tell you, and this is no exaggeration, that the institutional state has always been and continues to be the enemy of tangata whenua. In my experience, especially post-settlement, I have seen so many disappointed iwi and their leaders who negotiated for years to get just and durable settlements and then find it is undermined by the Sir Humphrey Applebys of the institutional state. And we are not going to have full and final settlements in New Zealand until civil servants understand this basic point. All too often, I have seen, for example, rights of first refusal or deferred selection opportunities for certain properties, and the land, for example, is contaminated or substandard in some way, and the state does not enter into the spirit of treaty negotiations and deeds of settlement, but regards them as commercial deals. So until the institutional state, I don't mean the political state, because I think, for example, that Andrew Little is doing an excellent job as Minister for Treaty of Waitangi negotiations, and I support what he does, as indeed I did when Michael Cullen was Minister. It's not the political state that causes the problems, it's the institutional state. So it's not a question of simply observing the legalities in an agreement, but breathing life into those agreements every time. It's not enough to learn a karakia or organise nice kai or have a nice pounamu carving around your neck. You've got to enter into the spirit of treaty negotiations. Right, I've got that off my chest, and it's something that means a lot to me. Now, there are a lot of issues that one could talk about, but let me tell you one issue that really interests me, because I'm very interested in intellectual property ever since I did a case years ago about a program called Opportunity Knocks. And it went to the Privy Council. Their lordships obviously knew the program, so found there was no copyright in the format of a talent quest show, and the headline in the Telegraph was Opportunity Flops. But intellectual property is one of the keys to New Zealand's success. And almost a decade ago now, I was negotiating with Ngāti Toa. And we just about got there, and they said, well, what about protection for the haka? And so we had to talk about how we were going to provide protection to the haka, and eventually we got there, and that great beacon of liberalism, the Dominion Post, had an amazing headline which betrayed their real view of matters: all black haka goes to Māori. And some years ago, I had the opportunity to go to Geneva to the World Intellectual Property Organisation, where I met with the former Director General, and we talked about protection of traditional cultural expressions and protection of traditional knowledge. And I don't think the New Zealand government, in particular IMBI, has put enough effort into this issue over the years. And I think Foreign Affairs needs to be criticised as well, because these are very important issues for all Indigenous peoples, obviously not just tangata whenua, but around the Pacific, and they have arisen in numerous ways in Latin America as well. And the example that was given to me, where of course we've got the haka as an example of a traditional cultural expression, but there is so much traditional knowledge where tangata whenua in many countries don't get the benefit of it, but they simply find that pharmaceutical companies take the benefit of it. So these are the sorts of issues, and I heard the bell, these are the sorts of issues that I really think do need to be focused on, and they are areas based on my work in the haka where I think we can make a positive contribution, but protection of the haka is but a very small step. So that's me, 2 key points: institutional state of civil servants out there, lift your game, and secondly, there's a lot of work to be done in those 2 areas.
I do need notes, so. Tēnā koutou katoa, namhiki koutou katoa. Toerua kina mate, haere, 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 atura. Kamihi ki te mana whenua, tātou e tone, kia ora, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. And 大家好，我是陈奈斯，新西兰的国会议员，一个出生在北京然后现在居住在新西兰的1.5代的移民。Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Naisi Chen, and thank you, Maddie, for your invitation to speak alongside these brilliant speakers, past ministers and obviously virtually today present ministers. And Minister Nataya had texted me this morning to say that she personally was so gutted she couldn't be here with all of you today. And thank you, Vanisa, for your introduction and your friendship over these few years. It's the first time we've actually shared the stage, I think. All these years. So absolutely stoked to be here with all of you. Now, for those of you who I haven't met before, haven't met me, if you did a bit of homework prior coming to this conference to see whether your ticket price was worth it, maybe you Googled my name. And if you did Google my name or, read on Twitter all about me, the chances of you guys finding out that I'm a spy for the CCP, that I'm an agent for the United Front, that my sole purpose of joining New Zealand politics was so that China could have more influence in New Zealand, might have been some of the results that came up on your search. Now, I can say all of this with a laugh here today, but let me tell you, back in 2016, when I was 23 years old running my very first general election, things weren't looking so good. And I think for me today, I want to share with you my personal journey of how I found a sense of belonging here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. It had taken me a really long time, and indeed I'm still trying to navigate this new sentiment of New Zealand. Well, because previous to 2016, for the last 17 years that I had lived and had been calling New Zealand my own home, there has been this sense of pride of being Chinese and coming from China as a country. Obviously, that sense of pride has been built on various different aspects, one of them being China's economic rise and building that middle class. So wealth had come from China to New Zealand, unlike my parents who came here in 1996, and my dad had arrived in Aotearoa, New Zealand with just $200 USD in his back pocket. Also, in New Zealand, the Chinese community was growing. We were seen as a big voter bloc, a big donor bloc to be reckoned with, and we were being respected not only by the business community, but also the political leaders as well. And thirdly, on the international stage, we had seen a change of tone from the areas where I grew up under Deng Xiaoping and then Jiang Zemin. That was a very quiet and docile tone. When she came to power, we saw that huge change. Within China, I think the Chinese people felt this sense of pride that finally we are standing up straight to defend ourselves. However, almost overnight in 2016, New Zealanders started to talk about how the Chinese community here was here to advance the united front of the CCP, how Chinese people were trying to infiltrate New Zealand and its political thinking. And I just remember seeing that almost, like I said, overnight cool down of relationships between all parts of society with the Chinese community. And I remember feeling like I didn't know anymore how to belong to this country. I had for so long called Aotearoa, New Zealand my home, and the Chinese community had nurtured me, had supported me in my leadership journey prior to coming into Parliament. And all of a sudden, I didn't know what I should be saying on a public stage like this. I didn't know what to talk about anymore in front of my friends, my Pākehā or Māori friends in university. And I didn't know how to lead the Chinese students that I was fortunate to be called their president in New Zealand Chinese Student Association anymore. And so I knew I had to embark on a journey to find my own cultural identity, walking in these two worlds, and whether or not it will or it does have any influence on my political identity as well. So after the 2016 elections, I travelled straight to Taiwan because I had grown up in a church planted by Taiwanese people, and I thought I should always start with my spiritual identity first. And upon coming back from Taiwan, I was really fortunate to be appointed to the board of Foundation North. It was there that I had started to become more and more aware of the voices of mana whenua. I learnt there that I am tangata te tiriti, that I have to do my part in upholding the obligations the minute I landed here in Aotearoa. We were also very fortunate to have the guidance and the wisdom of Kevin Prime as our kaumātua. Now, Kevin had grown up in a all te reo Māori environment. He thought, you could tell whenever he got up to speak, even in English, he had thought in his mind and the way that his logic and rationalised things, then obviously all his contributions to how we funded things around the board table was all through a Te Ao Māori perspective. And I was so respectful of the way he did it. So he set me on a journey as well of discovering my own identity. And so I started taking calligraphy lessons and Chinese philosophy lessons. The first thing that I was taught in my calligraphy lessons was to draw spirals, because that gathered the chi of the power and the forces of the universe. Spirals, what does that think of? What do you think of when I say spirals in your mind? The koru, that's right. And so from there, I started to realise, and my teacher, Xingming Shi, she's written a book called Our Footprints in the Blue Pacific, and she explores the theme of how Māori culture and Shang Dynasty China, so this is 2070 years before Christ, has so much in common with Te Ao Māori. So we do have connections. And that is my personal journey, and I'm still on that journey, like I said, to find those connections with my culture being Chinese, but also to this piece of land that I have now called home. So if I can find that within myself, I'm here to encourage all of you that whether it's in our diplomatic relationships, whether it's here in New Zealand, we can find those commonalities by embracing our complexity of being fully human as well. Tēnā koutou.
Kia ora koutou rau rangatira mai kui mā koroma aku tua kana me taina mā ko hui mai nei tēnā wā ki te mana whenua mana whakahaere tēnei te mihi ki a koutou. Me koutou, ngā memo tēnei hui o Diplosphere. Kia ora, Hone McGregor, and to acknowledge my fellow panel members. Very nice to see you, Honourable Chris Finlayson. I think the last time we saw you was when Whakatū Corporation was taking the crown to the Supreme Court, which we won. So very nice to be on the same side. Litigious as ever. But nice to be on the same team. Nice to be on the same side today. Marvellous. Yes, indeed. But I do like your messages. That's great. Moving on, I've got 6 minutes to talk about what 2030 would look like. And I've taken a largely trade focus on this one. And because I'm kind of a key messages kind of guy, I've just gone with 5 key basic messages around some Māori values. So, first one, it sounds basic, but we need to trust each other. So the first one is around trust, or what I call mana to mana. We have to trust each other in our international relationships and for trade through the whole negotiations process. Trust isn't the exclusive purview of Māori, but there are some concepts in Te Ao Māori that really support building trust. How do you build trust? Well, Winnie talked about it this morning. One of the things that you can do in terms of start with mana to mana kaupapa, which is talking about our values. You can take a values approach to what you want to do in terms of the trade negotiations process. And that includes the manas, the tangas, that Rawenia talked about. But it's about living the tangas too. So that's really fundamentally important. I think they're intrinsically Māori, these tangas, but I think they actually can apply internationally too. So that's the first thing, first value, mana to mana. Second one, reciprocity, which we heard about this morning. But we call it in the concept tau utu utu. Tau utu utu in a trade focus, one fundamental concept is that each side has to benefit. So, tau utu utu comes from the practice around our pōhiri, where we have one speaker, and then one speaker, and then one speaker, and then one speaker. And it's, in terms of an international foreign policy or a trade perspective, it's about the cycle of escalating exchange. So, tau utu utu is born on this positive, escalating exchange principle. And it's a really important idea because that fundamentally is what we probably call reciprocity. It encourages escalating rather than equal investments in terms of our time and resources. So the second one, tau utu utu, or reciprocity. Third one is te pae tāwhiti, or shared value. I hear a lot of government. Who's from a government agency here? Yeah. Oh, wow. A lot. Cool. I see te pae tāwhiti and written all of your documents. It's quite interesting to read it. So, from my perspective, our interpretation around that one is we're looking beyond the distant horizon, te pai tāwhiti. That's about shared values. So we have a whakatauki, which is kia whakato Māori, te haere whakamua. And that's the one where we talk about, I actually walk backwards into the future with my eyes fixed firmly on my past. So that's really talking about the Māori perspectives of time, where past, present and future are actually intertwined. Why is that important? Because the past is actually central to and shapes both the present and the future. So if you take from this perspective, we carry the past into the future. And the real strength of carrying one's past into the future is that you take your ancestors with you. They are ever present. So I'm a director of a Māori corporation called Wakatu. We're a whānau business. We have a 500-year plan. Our 500-year plan is called Te Pai Tāwhiti. And it looks out into the future and sets our aspirations for our whānau. For us, in order to us to understand our future, we have to look back at our past, and in particular the values of our tūpuna, which is really about the well-being of our people. So from a trade perspective then, our first question has to be to our trading partners, how do we share and achieve a future together? The shared future should be the first discussion, because we can reverse engineer all the rest of the stuff from that point. Starting at the macro level avoids us getting down into the transactional discussions. What's our future vision? What's your future vision? What's our combined future vision, and how do we achieve that together? So that's the third value, hoia ki te pai tāwhiti, shared values, shared futures. The fourth thing is around intergenerational wellbeing, which we heard about this morning. We're always taking a holistic lens to look at the world by as Māori. And one of those really important things is really ensconced in a value around intergenerational wellbeing or hauora. For people in our organisation, we talk about the people, planet and profit. That's tangata ora, mauri ora, te tai ao, our environment, and putia, because we're actually a Māori incorporation. In the trade sense, that's about sustainable approaches to economic growth and a shift away from resource-intensive productions. By 2030, all of our trade will be holistically framed in Māori frameworks, ones that integrate all of the tangas, but also take on board some of the kaupapa of stuff that we call today the Trade for All agenda. That agenda is about reforming the trade architecture that we currently have and advancing the values with strong alignment with kaupapa Māori. In our trade agreements now, we see chapters around trade and sustainable development, trade and the environment, trade and labour, trade and gender. All these chapters are including de rigueur. They're the main things that come into it. They follow along the kaupapa of the shared values for us as Māori. We already see places actually accepting these sorts of things with trade and Māori chapters in them. So last week, we just got an EU FTA, which had a Māori trade chapter included in it, the first of its kind for a 27 country group. The other thing around intergenerational wellbeing is that Māori believe that our success is in succession. So we all do associate programs to actually bring people on board for those next generations. So that's my fourth point, hauora, or intergenerational wellbeing. So I'm just really underscoring all the discussion that we've had today. The last point is one that we really touched on all throughout the conversations in today's thing, which is about tipuna pono. And you heard that today described as being good ancestors by Dan. So all this from a Māori perspective is just really about our fundamentals, values of ensuring that we, the current generation, us individuals here, are acting as good ancestors right now. Our Wakatu purpose is to preserve and enhance our taonga for the benefit of future generations. Our Tito Ihu intergenerational strategy is called Tipuna Pono, being good ancestors. And that's really what it's about. So it's a kaupapa for all New Zealanders, both those living now and those yet to come to embrace. So it's my fifth point, Tipuna Pono, which is about being good ancestors. Nō reira, some of this probably may seem a bit esoteric in a trade context, but to be really truly transformative, some discussions should actually transcend the transactional and individual government or political parties' narratives. Māori are coming into the 2020s and matters of foreign policy and international engagement and trade, with a far more cohesive agenda and a greater sense of personal agency. Transformation is happening in the foreign policy sector right now. Values that we hold true are indeed already permeating government policy. We're reaching back into our whakapapa, acknowledging our own kaupapa and seeing how they place Aotearoa in the wider world. Hauora, tauutuutu, genuine trade for all agenda and the kaupapa that must be the fundamental platforms around future intergenerational engagement for really powerful, intergenerational, cultural, economic and political relationships. Nō reira, ka nui te mihi ki a koutou, mō o koutou aroha i runga i tēnei ropu kua tai mai ki wanganui o koutou. He kaupapa tino nui, nā te mea, tēnei te kaupapa o he waka eke noa. Kia ora.
Nā mihi mō te kōrero o Chris, Naisi and Hone. Pātai. Any pātai out there? Here are some mic runners. We've got a question at the back there.
Kei te pai e mihi atu ana. I te whakaro reto i puta mai a koutou, hei wānanga ma te whatu ngā kau a te tangata. Kārua, ka reo rua tēnei, kei pōhehe mai. Wai anō ko te pātai, i puta mai i a koutou, i puta te whakaro i a koutou katoa, ko tētei a kōrero mō tēnei me te tau utu utu. Ko tērā atu, rite tonu pē ki tāku i te atanei e kōrero ana mō te ngira. Toko maha ngā momo i konei, toko maha hoki ngā iwi i roto nei. E aina mana, e Māori, e tau iwi a waiake, a waiake, a waiake. Ko te pātai, ka ruia mai ki a koutou, e a ata ngira, e kuuna mai ai katoa nei mātou ki roto i ngā pūtake o tēnei wātonu e whakaro ana ki te āpōpō. Kārua, ko te tauutu utu kōrero nei au, tērā pēr, ruarau i mua, te kaupapa i tūmai, engari kei konei tonu e ora tonu ana te whakaaro ki tērā tauutu utu ki tō e nai nei tonu. Ko te taki pērā tia te pātai i roto i taku pātai tuatahi, ka hui a mai katoa tia tātou ki roto i te ngira, me te whakaro ki te ina nei, hei ora ki a pōpō. Hoi anō ka huri ki te reo i taka mai te ngutu o tāwai. It's great to hear some conversation about what's going on out there in the many fields of work and understanding that Aotearoas have been engaged with. I want to make a comment and a question as well, and it goes to one of our second speaker, so eloquently expressed her views on how her worldviews are being expressed in her work. So one of the questions that came to mind was when I heard some of the conversations from all of you. One was about the tauutu-utu. The tauutu-utu, I understand, is correct, that's right. Now, this is not a challenge again. Tauutu-utu can go back 200 years, but its relevancy is still in the present. Once we understand what happened back there, defined a way forward in the now. The reason why I'm asking that, we've got so many diverse groups of people within different walks of life, different ethnic groups, different worldviews coming in here. So there was the whakatauki I used this morning, which is about the ngira, or the needle, which one of our tupuna, Potatau Te Ero used, and this understanding how do we get to work better together. Back then, you need one needle to be able to sew all these different threads through that. And in those days, there was an event that happened that needed to happen for him to use that whakatauki in order to pull everybody together. The question of using that here in the now is what is the needle that we should be using, or the whole, to bring us all together, all the ethnic groups together in Aotearoa, with the understanding of this many diverse fields of understanding and cultural values, knowing that we're in Aotearoa. Kia ora
Kia ora, thank you. Not to recite my my maiden speech, but I had explored this topic specifically, and my just my thoughts and my insight into this is that we come to New Zealand each bringing our own cultures, and that needs to be celebrated. We're such a diverse community here in New Zealand, and we're better for it. However, I think we need to find a commonality which is set in our values, that we as New Zealanders together, whether you're a Chinese New Zealander, Korean New Zealander, a Māori New Zealander, but we, because we've chosen to come together as Aotearoa New Zealand, we need to find common values that ground us together, and then still celebrate all the diversity and culture that we have to bring together as part of New Zealand.
Kia ora. We've got a few minutes maybe perhaps for one question, one more. Kia ora.
Kia ora tātou, māku e whai na mihi ko mihi kia koutou i te pai. Hariko ana tēnā ki te kite nā chapters me ki ko tāpirihi ki roto i nei pepa hoko nā reira nā mihi kia koutou te taimata i whakamahi tēnā mahi mō mātou. I think just my quick part, I suppose it's building on the previous one as well. Blue sky thinking, the likes of, with yourself, Honourable Chris Finlayson and also Hone up there as well, in terms of implementing a Māori trade chapter, and if the sky's blue and you can do anything you like, I suppose, noting that there might not be a legal weighting behind it, how would you see it meaningfully done both here in Aotearoa, and then what would your expectations be to our partners overseas?
Well, I'm no trade lawyer, but I did talk about one particular item, and that was protection of intellectual property. I think there are some big issues there that do need to be looked at, and I don't think they are being looked at properly, or if they are, they're being looked at superficially. And so I think there's a real need for the government, and in particular the Ministry of Business, Industry and Economic Development, that don't pay enough attention to intellectual property to master those issues and the aspirations of tangata whenua, and move on them with slightly more vigour than they have displayed at present.
Kia ora. I'd support that. Intellectual property is a fundamental aspect to it, and we have to get it right. We haven't got it right in our domestic settings yet.
No.
Y262 is still languishing around, probably costing $100,000 a day for a bunch, no offence, bureaucrats, for some bureaucrats to support us in getting this done. And we can't require or insist on our international partners to recognise our things that we haven't recognised in our own country first. The second thing is we do have a couple of free kia ora ho, ka nui te mihi kia te Peretania. Thank you for the UK to agree to a Māori chapter, an Indigenous trade chapter. Thank you to the European Union for agreeing to it. Now what we have to see is we have to get all these lofty concepts implemented. And to be implemented, we really need some support around funding the action plans that drop out of it. So this is a call out to, kia ora, Martin, your group and others, all the other government agencies, just to support us implementing it, because we've got some amazing kaupapa. All the kaupapa we talk about here, intellectual property, climate change, rights, these things are really important for us, and we've got a plan on it. We just need it juiced up and supported through some putia. Kia ora.
Could I just make one other point? You've got to realise that the Copyright Act 1992, I think it was passed in the pre-internet age, and so much has happened, and I think there's a danger that often government departments fall for, and that is to have amendments, but you can undermine the structure of the legislation, and the time has come for a comprehensive review of intellectual property, and at that time, and I'm talking particularly of copyright, and at that time start to explore some of these issues about protection of cultural expressions. Let me give you an example, and I'd be very interested to know from anyone here about the most recently signed agreement with the EU and the chapter on IP. Certainly we're not allowed to use the word feta in New Zealand, or won't be, but what about the advertisement which came out of Fiat some years ago when there was a haka performed? Is that sort of thing going to be banned as well? So there's a lot of hard law stuff here. You've got to get beyond the warm feelings and knuckle down and deal with those issues.
Only because it wasn't mentioned, and you would have had a discussion about Y262. Well, there's a lot of people in here who work really hard on Y262, and I'm just going to say it's sat actually on the minister's table. Kia ora.
It didn't actually. That's absolutely wrong. During my time, we were dealing with a wide range of co-governance, gee, I'm frightened to say the word these days, and protection of the haka. So I was going to say with respect, but I don't believe in all that pleasantry. You're wrong.
And maybe the last thing that we should do is actually, there's intellectual property has a really important aspect to it. It's about the rights and protection. The rights aspect is really important. There's a big thing in the world called the Nagoya Protocol, and it actually talks about access and benefit sharing, where mātauranga is a really important aspect that will fall within that. We haven't signed it. Not sure why we haven't. Saudi Arabia has. We're a little bit behind the eight ball on that.
Excellent. Thank you, Hone, Naisi and Chris. Thank you for the pātai. I think we're back on track. Homai te pakipaki.
Are you still there? Did you want your computer? Yeah.
Talanoa just went out the back window. Don't you reckon?
That threatened to get a little robust, didn't it? To be honest, I was into it. Keep going, keep going. Oh, beautiful. But can I acknowledge our chair, Vanisa, for keeping that going, Ngami Henry Kiakoe, and to our panellists, thank you all very much. That was a thought-provoking session. Indeed, ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. By the way, I don't know if the Honourable Chris Finlayson is still here, but I don't think Martin actually mentioned which minister. But anyway, ka pai, haraturu. Right. Whitu and Waru, we won't get to 10, okay? But that's okay. I went to Māori hui and they wanted to get to 100, and I was going, you couldn't even get to 2, bae. I won't say which area they were from, but anyway, they may be due whakapapa line to my father, who is Ngāpuhi. Anyway, right, so we'll go to Whitu and Waru, okay, ka pai? So just stay seated. Oh, inoho, and I'll show you, okay? And that way you can't blame me if you get it wrong. Tahi, rua, toru, wha, rima, ono, whitu, waru. Whitu, ono, rima, wha, toru, rua. So do you see why I said Vogue and Madonna? Okay. Tahi, rua, toru, wha, rima, ono, whitu, waru, whitu, ono, rima, wha, toru. Whitu, your right, my left. Whitu, waru, whitu, ono, rima, wha, toru, rua. Tahi. Got it? We'll go so. Tutu, mate. Taringa wakarongo! Oh, you're gonna go, oh man, hey. We'll try again. Taringa wakarongo! Toru, wha, tahi. Tahi, rua, tahi. Tahi, rua, toru, rua, tahi. Wha, tahi, rua, toru, wha, toru, rua. Rima. Tahi, rua, toru, wha, rima, wha, toru, rua. Ono. Tahi, rua, toru, wha, rima, ono, rima, wha, toru. Ka pai, whitu. Tahi, rua, toru, wha, rima, ono, whitu, ono, rima, wha, toru. Waru. Tahi, rua, toru, wha, rima, ono, whitu, waru, whitu, ono, rima, wha, toru. Ka pai. We'll go a bit faster. If you don't get it, e noho. If you do, stay standing. Alright? Now, as I said, I tried this with a group of people from an iwi that I won't mention. Rhymes with kapuhi. And none of them sat down, even though I was hearing clap-ons. Rua, toru, wha, rima. So anyway, if you don't get it, e noho, ka pai. Toringa wakarongo, toru, wha, tahi, 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 rua, toru, rua, wha, tahi, rua, toru, wha, toru, ka pai, rima. Tahi, rua, toru, wha, rima, wha, toru, ono. Tahi, rua, toru, wha, rima, ono, rima, wha, toru, whitu. Tahi, rua, toru, wha, rima, ono, whitu, ono, rima, wha, toru, waru. Tahi, rua, toru, wha, rima, ono, whitu, waru, whitu, ono, rima, wha, toru, rua. Who's still standing? Come on. We go a bit faster, right? Don't sit down, stay standing, here we go. Toringa wakarongo, toru, wha, tahi, tahi, rua, tahi, tahi, rua, toru, rua, tahi, rua, toru, wha, toru, rua, rima, tahi, rua, toru, wha, rima, wha, toru, rua, ono, tahi, rua, toru, wha, rima, ono, rima, wha, toru, whitu, tahi, rua, toru, wha, rima, ono, whitu, ono, rima, wha, toru, waru, tahi, rua, toru, wha, rima, ono, whitu, waru, whitu, ono, rima, wha, toru, pasta? Tahi, waru, toru, wha, tahi, tahi, rua, tahi, tahi, rua, toru, rua, wha, tahi, rua, toru, wha, toru, rua, tahi, tahi, rua, toru, wha, rima, ono, Hawaii, the nugget bit. Okay, we're going to carry on now to our last session, and it's indeed a privilege to have this session with our next panel to discuss voices from across the oceans, Turou, Hawaiiki, or as we call it in Māoridom, the Scotty Morrison Memorial, Turou, Hawaiiki. Voices from across the oceans. What I might do is I might ask our panellists to ascend the stage, if I may. So our first panellist is Her Excellency Elizabeth Wright Koteka from the Cook Islands High Commissioner, Your Excellency. Haramai, tēnā koe, haramai. Our second is Her Excellency Herinda Sidhu, the Australian High Commissioner, Your Excellency, tēnā koe. Her Excellency Maria Belén Bogado from the Argentinian Ambassador, tēnā koe, Your Excellency. And Her Excellency Joanne LeMay, the Canadian High Commissioner, Your Excellency, haramai. What I'll do is I'm going to ask each of Their Excellencies to say a few words, if you'd like. And then if we have time at the end, we'll ask some questions. Ka pai tēnā. And as I say, it's a privilege to be here with you on this panel this afternoon and to have you with us. So to introduce our first speaker, she is the Cook Islands High Commissioner to New Zealand. Prior to taking up this role in 2018, she was a consultant and has worked in both the public and private sector throughout her career. She served as Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister from 2012 to 2016 and was previously Director of Policy at the Office of the Prime Minister. She is considered by many to be the Cook Islands' foremost policy and planning expert and is married with 3 children. Would you please make welcome Her Excellency Elizabeth Wright Koteka, the Cook Islands High Commissioner. Your Excellency, thank you.
Te atu e te mana o te e inua, tātou kātou toa, kia orana rawa i te roa maana ana o tō tātou mitu atua. The Pacific is made up of 3 sub-regions, Micronesia, Melanesia, and Polynesia, terms given to us by European explorers. Polynesians have many things in common, including language, cultural practices, values, and traditional beliefs. Despite these commonalities, Polynesia is further seen as having 2 distinct culture groups, Western Polynesia and Eastern Polynesia. In these 2 distinct cultural groups, languages, cultural practices, beliefs and values are even closer. A fact about East Polynesia that most people don't know is that our peoples are known as Māori in Aotearoa and the Cook Islands, Maohi in French Polynesia and Rapa Nui, and Maoli in Hawaii. We are tangata Māori, Maohi, Maoli, one people that trace our ancestry back to Hawaiiki or Hawaiiki. In Minister Mahuta's inaugural foreign policy speech in Waitangi in 2021, she confirmed that New Zealand Aotearoa's identity is drawn from our Polynesian heritage. I call it tiroanga Māori or Māori worldview, unquote. Our Cook Islands Māori identity and worldview too is very much shaped by our tangoanga Māori. O Waroa, Pirianga Tangata, Tāokotaʻianga, and Manatiaki. Haroa is the foundation of care, kindness, respect, doing what is right, persistence, and so much more. Pirianga Tangata means the connection or bond that we have with each other as family, friends, and human beings, like Aotearoa's Whanaungatanga. Tāokotaʻianga is working together for common goals and aspirations, the same as Kotahitanga. All Māori people have a deep affinity to our moana, papainua, and rangi, and their importance to our intergenerational well-being is ingrained in our psyche. Our role as stewards of our intergenerational well-being and the significance of this role is termed by us manatiaki, just like kaitiaki in Aotearoa. We've already heard today about the role of Te Ao Māori in New Zealand. I'll be speaking on the Cook Islands version of Te Ao Māori. It is actually called Te Ao Māori as well. How these values are currently incorporated across our governing bodies, guiding frameworks and way of life, and how much further we will have to travel. The Cook Islands achieved self-government and free association with New Zealand in 1965. This is a unique constitutional status which affords us control over our governance, law-making powers and foreign affairs, while at the same time maintaining our New Zealand citizenship. Our economy is driven by tourism, with earnings also from fisheries, offshore banking, and other niche market exports. Underpinning our tourism product is aroa and the kia orana values of meitaki and manatiaki. Kia orana, may you live on, our greeting, serves as a blessing unto others. Meitaki, thank you, is a value that espouses gratitude and contentment. Manatiaki refers to our obligations as guardians and stewards over our natural environment. Our tourism authority consistently promotes our kia orana values throughout the country. We believe that the practice of aroa and our kia orana values serves us well in ensuring that our tourism remains competitive while not losing track of the importance of Te Ao Māori and our authenticity. I hope you've all experienced that kia orana spirit when you've been to Rarotonga. If you haven't, you better hurry up. Outside of the main island, Rarotonga, our Pāinua communities have governance that allows for integration with the Western mode of national government, while also keeping autonomy in affairs within their respective reefs through their island governments and traditional leadership structures. Where this mode of governance is extremely effective is in the practice of manatiaki, in particular the custom of ra'ui. Stop ringing that bell, it's not good manakitanga. Ra'ui is how we conserve and manage the use of natural resources, whether they be on the land or in the sea. Areas are designated through bylaws and/or traditional rituals for a period to allow for revitalization of natural resources. Compliance is safeguarded through traditional leaders and island governments. The practice of ra'ui has also been applied at the national level to our entire EEZ. We've put this in law, and in order to protect, conserve the ecological biodiversity and heritage values of our Cook Islands marine environment. The Act establishes marine protected areas of 50 nautical miles around each of our 15 islands, where all commercial extractive activities are restricted. These closed zones equate to an area of 320,000 square kilometers. We recognize that as human beings, we should try our best to manage our common home. Climate change is recognized as the greatest threat of our Blue Pacific continent. To adapt to the impacts of climate change, many communities draw from traditional knowledge, traditional practices of bolstering, eroding shorelines, fishing and planting are being revived. Most of our Cook Islands population live abroad. There are almost 90,000 Cook Islanders living in New Zealand. There are, in comparison to 14,000 at home. Despite living abroad, the value placed on pirianga tangata keeps them connected and representing our country and our values wherever they are. Many community-level projects are realized because of the contributions of our diaspora. A connection to the homeland that is entrenched in the understanding that those who leave will help when they are needed, and those who remain will look after the family's right to have a home at home. These are but a few examples of Te Ao Māori in practice in the Cook Islands and how it can be sustained in a modern world. If anything, I believe that we need to bring more of our Te Ao Māori values into our development in order to reinforce our identity as tangata Māori in all that we do. I want to finish by sharing a very recent encounter that I had. Last weekend, the Cook Islands High Commission supported the annual gathering of our Cook Islands tertiary students, known as Ta'okotai. This Ta'okotai Anga, this event brings together our students, both those born in the homeland and abroad, to celebrate what makes them Cook Islanders. On Friday night, we held an impromptu speech competition, posing the question of how can the diaspora contribute to development in the homeland? A young man, near the completion of his engineering degree at AUT, spoke of his plans to move to Australia for work. He said that despite this, he would continue to share his culture, values, and Cook Islands identity, and concluded that, "I am 682 to the world, baby." 682 meaning the Cook Islands area code. There is no doubt that the world is changing. This is true for the Cook Islands as it is for New Zealand. But I hope that what I have shared with you today serves as a reminder that our long-held traditions and wisdom of those who came before us must continue to guide and ground us as we strive for progress. Continuing to move forward whilst being guided by our values of Te Ao Māori is not only possible, but necessary. We should not have to be what the world determines or what Western values entrenched in colonized history dictates. As the young man from AUT said, it's time to be 682 to the world, baby. Kia ora ana.
Your Excellency, tēnā koe. Maitaki. E te uri o te matua o kupe, kia ora ana, tēnā rau atu koe. Hua whānau apunu I tō kōrero. Especially the part about whoever's ringing the bell, stop it. Tēnā koe. Your Excellency, ngā mihi nui kia koe. Kia huri ki te kai kōrero tuarua Iaia nei. She is a senior career officer with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and was most recently the Chief Operating Officer and Deputy Secretary of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. She has previously served overseas as Australia's High Commissioner to India and in Moscow and Damascus. In Canberra, she has served in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade in senior leadership roles, as well as in the Department of Climate Change and Energy Efficiency. the Office of National Assessments, and the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. She holds a Bachelor of Laws and a Bachelor of Economics from the University of Sydney. Would you please make welcome the Australian High Commissioner, Her Excellency Harinder Sidhu. Your Excellency, tēnā koe.
You're such a hard act to follow. Ko tēnei taku mihi ki ngā tāngata whenua o te rohe nei. Ka mihi hoki au ki ngā tohu o te rohe nei. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa. I'm delighted to be with you all here this afternoon, and this is my first Diplosphere event, my first outing since I took up my role 3 months ago, so it wasn't that long ago, but it feels like quite a long time. And I really would like to acknowledge you all and acknowledge the members of the Diplomatic Corps who are here today. So coming to New Zealand was not, a difficult decision for me. Australia and New Zealand are about the closest two countries that you can imagine. We're joined by the bonds of friendship, history, values, and sacrifice. Next year, we'll be celebrating 80 years of diplomatic relations, although our relationship goes way back beyond then. 40 years of the closer economic relations bilateral free trade agreement. Next week, this week, the Australian-New Zealand Leadership Forum, or what we call in Australia the Festival of New Zealand in Australia. Will go on all week. I'm heading out tomorrow, but I couldn't go without talking to all of you. One thing that's going to shape that conversation all this week is the new government in Australia, which was elected on the 21st of May. So there's obviously quite a lot of curiosity about, well, what is that government about? Where is it going to go? And what does that mean for foreign policy? So I thought what I would do today is talk to you about where I think the differences might be and what changes you might expect. It's a very long list, so I'm going to boil it down to 3 main items. First is with respect to our relationship with our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, our First Nations people. Our government came in with a commitment to implement the Uluru Statement from the Heart in full. Now, I haven't got time to go into detail because I've got 6 minutes and it's all clicking away, into detail on it, but I want to commend the statement to you. It really is a very beautiful document, and it speaks of 3 key commitments: voice, treaty, truth. Our government, and in fact, the newly elected Prime Minister, the very first thing he said on announcing his victory was his first commitment was to commit to implement this in full. And as part of that commitment in this term of government, the government is going to work to enshrine the first part of that, an Indigenous voice to Parliament. But building on this, our Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, has promised to introduce a First Nations foreign policy to reflect Indigenous voices in our national identity. And that's really nested in the very core idea that foreign policy starts with who we are. Minister Wong has said we tell a more powerful and a more persuasive story of Australia when we tell our full story. Now, it will take time for us to consider, learn, and evolve how to do this. Our situation and our relationship with our First Nations people is very different to what I find here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. As a practical step, we will appoint an inaugural First Nations ambassador who will lead a new office within the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. As we do so, we recognise that Aotearoa, New Zealand is further ahead than Australia on this. We can learn from you. We can learn how to better represent First Nations peoples and how to weave their values into our foreign policy. And I was very taken with the way that Foreign Minister Nanaia Mahuta presented that this morning. That's, I think, what we are reaching for, but we are very early in our journey. And of course, there's some practical underpinnings here. We have in Aotearoa, New Zealand and Australia Indigenous collaboration agreement, which gives us some practical meat on those bones. So that's our first area and our first priority, and the first thing that you will see that is different. There's continuity and change, which is a really lovely phrase we use a lot in our foreign policy in other areas. But the government, on the continuity side, the government has reinforced our commitment to our region. There's a desire to maintain and deepen the focus to the Indo-Pacific region, but in particular also to the Pacific. We'll continue to seek a stable and prosperous Indo-Pacific where rules and sovereignty are respected. And already the government's reinforced its commitment to the key structures, the Quad, ASEAN, AUKUS, the Pacific Islands Forum, and in fact underscored their words with actions. So the very first independent travel by our foreign minister and our prime minister, our foreign minister on day 4 of her job, she travelled to Suva to speak to the Pacific Islands Forum, and the prime minister in his very first independent overseas trip went to Indonesia. And in doing so, they placed a focus on respectful listening to the perspectives of the region. This recognises that how we go about our diplomacy is as important as what we do. We already have deep cooperation with Aotearoa and New Zealand in the Pacific, and we recognise that New Zealand has a powerful and unique voice in that region. Australia can listen and learn from New Zealand's approach to regional issues. Our shared outlook and advocacy in the Pacific are a great asset. We are both founding members of the Pacific Islands Forum, and as Minister Wong has said on her first visit, nothing will change our geography, our proximity, and nothing changes the fact that our future is intertwined. As a first step, of course, we recognise that nothing is more central to the security and economies of the Pacific than climate action. And we've acknowledged and heard the very clear and consistent message from Pacific Island nations that climate change is the most critical challenge they face. So that brings me to the third element, climate change. International commitment starts at home. On the 16th of June, our government submitted a revised nationally determined contribution to the UN, lifting our emissions targets from 26 to 28% to 43%, and confirming our commitment to reach net zero by 2050. And that target is underpinned by a series of measures which will get us there. By 2030, for example, we expect the proportion of renewables in Australia's national energy market to get up to 82%, which is phenomenal when you think about 10 years ago it sat at 8%. The newer government will also reinstate the role of Australia's ambassador for climate change. That's domestic, but what we're importantly going to do is work with our region. Climate finance will be the backbone of that work. We have a very large commitment to climate finance, about $2 billion, as well as an allocation that we're going to pull out of the Australian Infrastructure Financing Facility in the Pacific to build climate resilient infrastructure. So they're the 3 points. It's essentially First Nations foreign policy, focus on our region, specifically on the Pacific, and climate change. Those issues and many more are going to be discussed this week at the Leadership Forum. And the range of topics that we're going to talk about will reflect the breadth of the bilateral relationship. It's a relationship that's constantly evolving, agile, and forward-looking. And I hope that I've shown through the issues that I've sketched to so far that there is that and much, much more we can do together, Australia, Aotearoa, New Zealand, and our region. I hope to have the opportunity to work with and learn from so many of you here today. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa.
Thank you, Your Excellency. So good to have you with us, and for your words as well. And we acknowledge the fact that you bring with you the mana and the Māori of the First Nations people of Australia in and amongst the hui today. Nō reira, tēnā koe. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Our next speaker, ladies and gentlemen, is an Argentine career diplomat. She served as Director General of International Cooperation and as Deputy Director of the Multilateral Economic Area in Argentina. Abroad, she served at the Argentine Embassy to the Kingdom of Spain. She has a master's degree in international relations and a degree in international relations She is married and has 2 children. Would you please make welcome Her Excellency, the Ambassador for Argentina, Her Excellency Maria Belén Bogado. Your Excellency, tēnā.
Kia ora, Mari Mari Kompuche, ko Maria Belén Bogado, toku inoa, ko Paraná, toku Auahoi, i te reo taketake o toku whenua, ko Guarani, te inoa a, ko te titanga o te inoa, e huanga o te moana. Ko Pampas toku whenua, ko Atetine toku iwi, kia ora, no reira, koto, tēnā koto katoa. Thank you, Diplosphere, Mati, dear Mati, Julian too. It's a real great honor for me to be part of this incredible panel. It is very hard to speak after and with these incredible women. And after all the incredible journey we have been through today during the conference. I know I have 6 minutes, I know. So I will try to make a brief statement regarding the importance that Argentina attaches to the promotion and protection of the human rights of indigenous peoples in the international arena. But I must to be absolutely frank with you. Significant progress has been made in the Argentine Republic in terms of the promotion and protection of human rights of indigenous peoples. However, in my country, a democratic, republican, federal, plural, and diverse state made up of a vast territory, one of the largest in the world, we still have large outstanding debts with indigenous peoples over 200 years after our independence as a nation state. Despite many advances, achievements, and rights being recognized thanks to the efforts many times of the indigenous peoples of our territory, the challenges are still enormous to this date. Perhaps the still unsatisfied demands of our native peoples are one of the great depths of our democracy, of which we celebrate 40 years next year, in 2023, after the dictatorship that devastated Argentina between 1976 and 1983. The indigenous peoples were not just a part of our population. As in many cases around the world, the native peoples that inhabited and still inhabit our territories witnesses the historical process of construction of our nation state in a rather alienated way. To put it very simply, it's fair to recognize that they did not play an active role in that process. They were made invisible. For too long, their existence was denied. For the lens of our historical process of building our nation states, and from a human rights perspective, we can see indigenous peoples as a group in our country that has been historically discriminated or in a situation of vulnerability. I would like to bring some general figures. In today's Argentina, out of a total population of around 47 million people, the official numbers indicate that just over 1 million recognize themselves as belonging to indigenous peoples. However, according to estimates made by indigenous peoples themselves, this number would actually be closer to 8 million. This discrepancy is mainly due to the fact, as I said before, that indigenous identity has been made invisible and denied by the state for extremely too long historical periods. Fortunately, and I think this discussion helped us too, this is changing now. There are around 40 indigenous people groups in Argentina and more than 2,400 communities across our vast territory. We have Mapuches and Tehuelches in Patagonia and the Pampas, Huarpes in the west by Andes, Calchaquíes, Diaguitas, and Cochas in the northwest and north, Pilagas, Tobas, Huichis, Cuom, and Guaraníes, the part of the region I come, to the northeast, and Mocovíes, Comechigones, and Charruas in the center of our country. Retracing our path through the development of new vision paradigms, as you are doing here, that integrate Indigenous people into our public space, ensuring that they are full citizens and actors in our democracies with a real impact on the formulation of our public policies that concern them, is our great challenge. For this, on one hand, Argentina is traveling a path of recognition, promotion, and protection of their rights. And on the other hand, we are searching for historical reparation. This is the starting point of this path to advance, work, and as you said all today, build together. In order to carry out and fully realize this vision and these purposes, we have internal tools and, of course, the external, international, institutional framework of the universal system for the protection of human rights, which at the same time, in the case of Argentina, is also internal because the international treaties has internal status. Our constitution is the main internal tool. It guarantees respect for their identity and the right to a bilingual and intercultural education, recognizes the legal personality of their communities, as well as the communal possession and ownership of the lands they traditionally occupy, and to this end regulates the delivery, if case, of other lands suitable and sufficient for human development, establishing that none of these lands will be alienable, transferable, or subject to encumbrances or embargoes. Our constitution also orders to ensure the participation of Argentine indigenous people in the management of their natural resources and other interests that affect them in coordination with federal and local governments. To promote this agenda, the federal state has created the National Institute for Indigenous Affairs, INAI in Spanish, which is dependent of the Ministry of Justice and Human Rights. The INAI develops and coordinates public policies to guarantee community development, the right to health and education, access to land, and the preservation of indigenous cultural identities. At the same time, it promotes the participation of communities. This is very important because it's what we are trying to do here in the design and management of states' policies that involve them, respecting their form of traditional organization and their values. I will now refer briefly, very briefly, to the international framework. So I will cut this because the bell is ringing. Because of our own historical reasons, as I explained in the beginning, the Argentine Republic maintains a strong policy of cooperation with international organizations for the protection of human rights, both within the scope of our Inter-American system and the universal system of the United Nations. From this cooperation, Argentina advocates for the advance and progressive development of human rights, law always tending to the expansion and the strengthening of these rights, which has placed us in a leadership role. As you may know, during 2022, Argentina is holding, in a very difficult moment, the presidency of the United Nations Human Rights Council. I won't say all the treaties we are part, just highlight that we have ratified. It's important to note that not many countries have done so. The Convention 169 of the International Labour Organization on Indigenous and Tribal Peoples. I would like to highlight that. Within the framework of the universal system, Argentina also integrates the group of Friends of Indigenous Peoples at the United Nations in New York, and strongly supports the work of the special procedures of the Human Rights Council regarding Indigenous people. We also value the work of the Special Rapporteur on the rights of Indigenous people, as well as the work of the expert mechanism on the rights of Indigenous people. These reports, observations, and recommendations are vital for us to build our agenda. I think it's important with all the discussion we had here at the local and at the international level. But let me say, the most important input for the design of a public policy is the vision and perspectives of the Indigenous people themselves, what you and us all together are trying to discuss here. So that's why before preparing this presentation, I had several video conferences with leaders from our native peoples represented in the INAI, and I requested them a message on only 2 because of the minutes of the challenges that were presented in the conference program. On the pandemic effects, they said, the leaders of our Indigenous people, states must confront the serious risk in which the Indigenous peoples find themselves. We need urgent measures to protect the right to health of the communities of the Indigenous people. In this sense, a warning is made about the situation of a special vulnerability in which Indigenous people find themselves after the acute phase of the pandemic and the need to develop specific responses for the community territory that must be respectful of Indigenous cosmovision and existing cultural identities. On climate change, and this is my final message, they expressed, we, the Indigenous peoples of Argentina, have renewed our commitment with our practices and knowledge to minimize the emission of greenhouse gases, and we demand that all the countries of the world fulfill their commitment to reduce gas emission. We have been given priority to our own scientific and technical initiatives through our cosmovision and perspectives that allow us to learn in production systems with minimal greenhouse effects based on our ancestral and traditional practices. And in this sense, we demand that Indigenous peoples be granted a special status in the process of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. We ask all governments to carry out climate impact studies and to take into account Indigenous knowledge systems and their observations, with the full and equal participation of Indigenous peoples in all aspects and stages of these studies. We direct our energies and organizational strength by consolidating our community values and principles that arise from the interrelation of life and natural elements. We reaffirm it by practicing our culture and our spirituality. We strengthen the role of our elders, wise men and women, and native authorities as bearers of ancestral and traditional wisdom that will protect our spirituality and cosmovision as a model of life in the face of the existing and sustainable model in the realities of climate change. I think with these very powerful messages, I would like to conclude and remain open to the Q&A session. Thank you very much. Ngā mihi risikuiki.
Your Excellency, thank you very much for those powerful messages from the Indigenous people of Argentina, and thank you for your transparency and honesty and the explanation of the history that leads to progress towards the urgency of remedy and accountability that the Indigenous people of Argentina are looking for. Your Excellency, tēnā koe. Our final speaker, ladies and gentlemen, has an LLB from the University of Montreal in 1992 and an MA in International Relations from Budapest University of Economic Sciences in 1994, and was called to the Quebec Bar in 1993 and joined the Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade in 1997, undertaking various assignments in Canada and abroad. At headquarters in Ottawa, this is a good intro. I can really ham this up. She served in the Central Europe Division and in the Trade Commissioner Service Renewal Division, and first served abroad as Trade Commissioner in Kuwait City, as well as in Warsaw. and then headed the Canadian consulate in Guadalajara and subsequently served as consul and senior trade commissioner in Chicago. From 2013 to 2016, she was appointed as ambassador to Romania, Bulgaria, and Moldova, and most recently was director and senior trade commissioner at the Quebec and Nunavut Regional Office of Global Affairs Canada in Montreal. Would you please make welcome the Canadian High Commissioner, Her Excellency Joanne Lemay. Your Excellency,
Tēnā koto, tēnā koto, tēnā koto katoa. Tansi nina nasko mon kapa witu miakota, which is in the Cree language of Canada. Hello, I'm grateful to have joined you here. So thank you I will take the advantage of being the last panelist of the day to congratulate and thank Mati, Julian, the entire team of Diplosphere. It's been really such a learning experience and inspiring day for I think for all, I can speak for all the panelists and the participants. Thank you so much. And also thank you for organizing this so close to Canada Day. That's our national holiday on July 1st. I know that that's the reason we're having this today. When we celebrate Canada Day, we also recognize that our history, the history and identity of Canada was shaped by the First Nation, the Inuit and the Métis of Canada, well before we thought of the idea of Canada Day. It's also now, it's a day of celebration, but it's also a day of reflection on the legacy that the scope of the full scope of Canada's history and the legacy that came today in what our Prime Minister has called the most important relationship that Canada has, and it's the relationship with the First Nations of Canada. So in Canada, we're very focused on advancing reconciliation with Indigenous people. So we're committed to making tangible differences across the country to support the Indigenous community on our path to reconciliation. And that's what I'd like to talk to you about today, is our path to reconciliation. And it starts first with listening to the First Nation, Inuit and Métis leaders that will, and to continue to support the Indigenous community in their work. So we're at the start of this critical journey towards reconciliation. And it's an ongoing process of establishing and maintaining respectful relationship. Before I talk about reconciliation, I'll just tell you a bit about the Indigenous people in Canada. There's about 1.4 million people of Indigenous ancestry in Canada out of a population of 38 million. There are 3 constitutionally recognized Indigenous peoples in Canada. They're the First Nations, the Inuit, and the Métis. The term Indigenous people encompasses all 3, so that's why I use this word. And like Argentina, we have many communities and a very diverse set of Indigenous peoples. So we have over 630 Indigenous communities representing 50 distinct nations. There's about 52 to 70 Indigenous language spoken, and only 3 are expected to survive this century. So prior to this is actually something that Sir Taylor mentioned today, and it's in my notes, I promise. Prior to the arrival of the settlements of European immigrants, Indigenous peoples of Canada had complex and successful knowledge systems related to land, science, mathematics, politics, clans, physical and mental health, and food security that provided healthy and abundant livelihoods for tens of thousands of years. So science. About our reconciliation, first, it's very important to acknowledge that Canada has historically denied Indigenous peoples their rights through assimilationist policies and practice, including the residential school system. It's not the only one, but it's the most salient one today. With the residential school systems, the Indigenous children were removed from their community. So this was systemic violence and harm that was inflicted on Indigenous children in the residential schools. And the impact is still felt today by the survivors, the families, and the communities. The first residential school opened in 1883, with the last school closing in 1996. 150,000 Indigenous children were forced to attend. So these institutions were government and church-run schools. And May 23rd was the one-year anniversary since the news of the confirmation of unmarked graves at the former Indian residential schools in Kamloops. You may have heard of this. That's in British Columbia. So many others have been confirmed since. So about our reconciliation. A Truth and Reconciliation Commission was established in 2007 to provide an opportunity to those directly or indirectly affected by the legacy of the residential school systems to share their stories and experiences. The Commission spent 6 years traveling to all parts of Canada and heard from more than 6,500 witnesses. And in June 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission presented its finding, which included 94 calls to actions or recommendations. Our Prime Minister accepted the Commission's final report and confirmed the commitment of the Government of Canada to work in partnership with Indigenous communities, provinces and territories and other partners to fully implement the recommendation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And I'd like to read you what he said at that occasion, which I find very inspiring. It is my deepest hope that this report and its finding will help heal some of the pain caused by the Indian residential school system and begin to restore the trust lost so long ago. To the former residential school students who came forward and shared your painful stories, I say thank you for your extraordinary bravery. Wow, I'm the last one. There's nobody that will. Okay, I say thank you for your extraordinary bravery and your willingness to help Canadians understand what happened to you. As the previous government expressed so eloquently in its formal apology, your courage is testament to your resilience as individuals and to the strengths of your cultures. The burden of this experience has been on your shoulders so far too long. The burden is properly ours as a government and as a country. Moving forward, one of our goals is to help lift this burden from your shoulders, from those of your families, from those of your communities. It is to accept fully our responsibilities and our failings as a government, as a nation. So I find this important because I think all of us Canadian, and we don't have a word for Pakehe, but all the Pakehe of Canada, it's incumbent on all of us to move towards a path of reconciliation. And I'll give you an example that comes from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The call for action talk about justice and the legal system, economic, educational, health, child welfare, language and culture, history, and other various reconciliation topics within the 94 calls to action. One that's relevant for me, for example, I can give you as an example, is a call to action 57, which is a duty of reconciliation with Indigenous people of all public servants. So all federal public servants have the duty to learn about the history and reality of Indigenous people in Canada. So we at the High Commission of Canada, we take this very seriously, and we're on a path to learning. And we've had, in the last year, I've been here a few occasions to come together and learn about this. But it's very, and it's led by my colleague here, Kelty Patterson, who's from our team, who's been leading this effort. It's quite important for us because in our history, I remember my history books and what I've learned through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I had no idea. I had no idea what the experience was. And it's when we talk about a burden, I find that me not knowing creates a burden for the Indigenous people who have to explain to me some basic things that, they don't understand why I don't understand. It's so obvious, but it's not up to them to educate me all the time. I have to come to an effort. Doesn't mean that we can't have conversations, but I have to do the effort, especially if I'm going to serve them as a public servant. Other examples are like New Zealand did with Matariki. We added a 12th public holiday. This one was to actually marked the Truth and Reconciliation Day that was actually based on a grassroots, again. This is hard. Okay, well, I'm almost done. It's essentially another day just to recognize the Indigenous efforts, and this was asked by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I have a long list. I wanted to talk to you about all the collaboration that we have between the Māori and the different Indigenous people of Canada. One thing I just want to point out is we both share our first Indigenous Governor General, and they had a chance to meet together in person at the Queen's Jubilee. So that's one very important aspect. But there is a lot of agreements that we're having between our countries and through multilateral fora. But the most important is the people to people, and I'm discovering all kinds of Indigenous connections that the Māori and the Indigenous people of Canada are having. I'll give you just one example that I didn't know before coming, just in the film industry. So there's been about 20 years of collaboration between the Māori and the Indigenous people in the film industry. And it culminated, one highlight last year is we have our first Canadian Indigenous co-production between Canada and New Zealand, and it's Night Raiders. So Taika Waititi is the executive producer, Alex Tarrant was an actor, and then there was all kinds of other people in that movie. It was quite good if you haven't seen it, but it's an example of our collaboration. And there was actually this weekend in Otaki, you may know, the Maoriland Film Festival. We had the honor of having some Canadian movies in there, and we had some Canadian participants that came here. And I just want to conclude as well, I also surveyed, we're very similar, I also surveyed some, actually just now I escaped a few minutes and I met with the CEO of Imaginative, which is a Canadian, it's actually the biggest Canadian Indigenous film festival in the world. And the CEO was just here in Te Papa a few minutes ago to talk to us. And she told me just spontaneously, her name is Naomi Johnson, and she said, and I'll leave you with that, the Māori are setting the gold standard in Indigenous cooperation. So congratulations to you, and we wish to collaborate more with you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. You mentioned Taika Waititi. Those are his relations over there. So when everyone talks about this Hollywood star, they go, no, that's just our cousin. So thank you for mentioning that. Thank you, Your Excellency, for those stories of reflection, of resilience, of resolution, of responsibility, and of recognised reconciliation. Thank you. You also mentioned your Indigenous Governor General. We have our first Māori female Governor General in New Zealand. She's cool. She's Ngāpuhi, but she's cool. Teresa's shaking her head. Don't tell anyone at home I said that, Teresa. So, Your Excellencies, and I just wanted to make a note, and it's been mentioned, but I thought I'd mention it again. Ki te koe te wahine toa, ne? Nā reira, e ngā wahine toa tēnā koutou katoa. Your Excellency Elizabeth Wright Koteka, Your Excellency Harinda Sidhu, Your Excellency Maria Belén Bugado, and Your Excellency Joanne LeMay. Thank you all very much. Tēnā koutou katoa. We really appreciate your time. Please, again, ladies and gentlemen, a huge round of applause. Unfortunately, we ran out of time for the Q&A, Your Excellency, so apologies, because the first question I was going to ask was, given the borders are open, which country should we go to first? And I know that would have been a robust discussion, but I'm sure you invite us all to visit your great nations and your Indigenous people. And with that in mind, ladies and gentlemen, if you look under your seats and you see rubbish, please take it with you when you leave. Your Excellencies, thank you all so much. Tēnā koutou katoa. Can I now ask Matty to make some concluding remarks before I might ask Mohi, who was our guest speaker / questioner today, to undertake our concluding karakia, if that's okay, Mohi. Meti tēnā koe.
Thank you very much, Julian. Earlier, one of our participants asked about courage, and I would like to congratulate Amanda for ringing this bell because it takes courage. So thank you very much, Amanda. Please clap her hand for her. Thank you. We have had 28 amazing speakers. We have traveled around the world in this venue. It has been incredible. I hope you feel as excited as I am, inspired, and you're ready to take it to another level and to continue this conversation, because it doesn't stop here. Very quick thanks to the National Commission for UNESCO, Amazon Web Services, Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, Tangata Whenua, and our wonderful Master of Ceremony, Julian Wilcox, and our amazing, stellar speakers, and also Harry, Eddie, Ethan, Daniel, my husband, who's been behind the scenes, Amanda, Tina. You have all done an amazing job, and thank you very much. I invite you to join me for a drink at the Wellington Club. Speakers are invited. You're invited to participate, but I think you buy your own drink. But you're most invited to join us. Thank you again. Yeah. Thank you again, and kia kite ano. Thank you.
Just to respond to the comment about me shouting, slight issue of resource allocation, Martin. So, no re mohi me pai ana ki a koe maupea taupuki ake I tā tātou hui. I do encourage you all to undertake the invitation extended by many to attend the Wellington Club, just for the fact that you can say you've been there. For those of you who haven't been there before. E karai mohi tēnā koe. Te tāwharau ni a tātou ki ngā manaakitanga mai, no re ngā mihi nui kia koe, kara tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe, Julian. Awe anō, kia whakarāpopoto e tēnei wahanga I au nei. E tuku rā no he whakaaro ki te wāhingaru kia tau. Ōna tō matamatotanga ki rungi a tātou. E tāo ki rā no tātou te puta ki te wai au. Ko te pua kawa ko tau ito kawa te mātai o tarangi tēnei o ki rā te take he runga mārua putuma. Waka e ke tea kurunga te moana wawai te moana tuatua moana oru koe waka tupungi a kawa ora. Kawa kei te apiti o te rangi a te nui, kei te mātata o te rangi a te nui, kei te mātoi o te rangi a te nui. Kei te ngātata o te rangi a te nui, kei te ngā wā o te rangi a te nui. Te kawa pūai nuku pūai rangi papa. Pūai ru, pūai o, pūai oko. Tāne whakawhariki moku puna. Tāne rua nuku, tāne toko rangi te pipi, te wari te atata. Tamaki I kuirangi te pūtanga o te tauira ki te wai au te amara ma eke mai te kawa ora. Kawa kei te apiti o tarangi a te anui tuku a ki runga. Te tangata ki runga. Te maia ki runga. Te kawa ora eke mai te kawa ora. Turuturu te kawa, whakamana te kawa ora, te kawa I arangi nui e tūna I a papatua nuku e takotoa nei te kawa ora. Tā e te kawatua tahi, tā e te kawatua rua, tā e te kawatua tori, tā e te kawatua wā, tā e te kawatua rima, tā e te kawatua ono. Tā e te kawatua witi, tā e te kawatua wari, tā e te kawatua iwa, tā e te kawatua ngā uru. Tā kiri te kawa I kawa matakaro, ka pipi, ka wana, ka waia, kei raru I ona taranga tū ki te rangi eke panuku eke tongoroa, aumi e, ui e, tāi. Hei kara ki e tērā mo taku inu a te pōnei. Kia ora tātou.